Hello, U.S. history students. By the time you are watching this, I will safely be in Canada, surrounded with the descendants of the Loyalists who betrayed us in the Revolution, and the accursed metric system and everything else, but at least I'll be with Mr. Burka, and I'll be back soon. I want to give you some quick instruction on Lesson 3.5, which is the Compromise of 1850, which is like the last time we were able to sort of scrape it together and look like a happily married couple between North and South before this thing broke down into an all-out civil war 10 years later. This is not an altogether happy story. And at the center of this problem is California. Let's remember, this is part of like the great plan of the Mexican War, right? James K. Polk's vision of acquiring California and manifest destiny. And it's like this, California is like this poison pill that we are going to struggle to choke down. It's a mess. So the Mexican-American War ends in 1848. By 1849, California is applying for admission as a state. And that's because the population had exploded there. People wanted to move because A, California and the climate and the farming is manifestly awesome. B, gold had been discovered there. And so they're applying for admission into the Union. They are applying as a free state, not a slave state. Remember, California had been part of Mexico. Slavery was illegal in Mexico. The people, by and large, who went to California were not the kind of people who went and brought their slaves on with them. This is like gold miners and entrepreneurs, and there just wasn't a paradigm for them of slavery. This is not something that was like in any way part of California's tradition. So the problem is this. Everyone recognizes California is part of the future of our country. Everyone recognizes California is great. What are we going to do? Like not have California come into the Union? Problem is, it has to come in as a free state. A problem beyond that is that the next places that are like coming online, the next territories that are coming online that will be applying for admission as states are all in free territory. They're all in the north. Minnesota, frankly, is the next one. So it looks like there's going to be a whole succession of new free states. There are no slave territories ready to become states. And so this like thing of we have to keep balance between slave and free states, that's looking like it's going to go away quickly. The other part of bringing in California is that 30 years previous, in the Missouri Compromise, we had kind of gotten through that by creating that so-called magic line, right? Everything north of here that comes in will be a free state. Everything south of here that comes in will be a slave state. Well, California, north and south of that line, said, well, we don't want slavery. And so what are we going to do, right? It's like we are between a rock and a hard place. How are we going to move forward? And how rocky is this going to be as we try to figure out a way through this process? The path forward was going to be led by Henry Clay. Poor Henry Clay, who had run for president 3 times and hadn't been successful. Henry Clay, the great Whig statesman, was the leader in Congress. The Whigs were in power in Congress at the time. And Henry Clay says, all right, I did the Missouri Compromise once upon a time, and we're going to get the old gang back together, and we're going to try to piece something together. Henry Clay is a Westerner. Along with him is this guy, Daniel Webster, sort of representing Northern interests, and John C. Calhoun from South Carolina representing Southern interests. And the three of them sort of say, we have to put a solution together on this. The problem is there is no way to do this to keep the slave-free state balance. There's just no way to make that happen. And so we're going to have to find something. If the South is going to have to swallow California as a free state and an imbalance in the Senate where now free states have more power than slave states, the North had better be ready to give some major concessions, or at least so says John C. Calhoun. And there's many Southerners in Congress who are unwilling to even consider this. And as the debates are going on, this whole hot, crazy summer, there's one moment even where a senator pulls out a loaded revolver and points it at the head of another, and everyone's like tackling each other. And this is getting heated. All right, this is fraught. The slavery issue we're starting to see through the 1850s is going to just be poisonous and toxic beyond anything we've ever seen before or since in American politics. And the Compromise of 1850 is our first real signal that things had reached a terrible new low point. This whole process is going to take about a year to navigate. John C. Calhoun dies midway through the process, but the work continues. Now, John C. Calhoun gives a final speech. He wasn't even able to give the speech. He wrote the speech, and then he sat, I imagine, giving the look that you can see here. He sort of sat as his nephew, who was in the U.S. House of Representatives, read this speech aloud. I want to read a portion of it here, where Calhoun is describing the South's position as they're sort of being told to accept this reality of California's admission as a free state. He says, "There is not a single territory in progress in the southern section, and no certainty that any additional state will be added to it. The destruction of the equilibrium," and here he means the equilibrium between slave and free states, "was caused by the legislation of this government, which was appointed as the common agent of all." He's saying the government should be representing all states, and right now it's acting only to favor the free states. If you admit California under all the difficulties that oppose her admission, you compel us, Southerners, to infer that you intend to exclude the South from the whole of the acquired territories, with the intention of destroying the equilibrium between the two sections, right? If you bring this in, then you're telling us that, like, north and south of that magic line from the Missouri Compromise, you're intending to exclude us, which will destroy us because we will be outnumbered in the United States Senate, and slowly you will pick away at our rights to own slaves. These are daunting words, all right? He's between the lines are very, very disturbing threats about what the future is going to hold. Anyway, he dies after he gives that. The work of the Compromise carries on. It's so difficult that Henry Clay's health begins to fade. He will die within months, and at a certain point he can't carry it on. And the work of like these complex negotiations is picked up by Stephen A. Douglas, who is a Democrat, not a Whig. He's a Democrat from Illinois. He'll come into our story later in Unit 4. And Stephen A. Douglas is an ambitious son of a gun, and he sort of fancies himself being the new Henry Clay, the new giant of Congress. And Stephen A. Douglas recognizes we're not going to be able to pass one sheet of paper that has all the different various parts of the compromise on it because everyone pulls their hair out. So we're just going to have to go bit by bit by bit, piece by piece, and try to get the votes. So in the end, what happened? In the end, what did each side have to give and take? Well, let me go through that. First of all, I want to note off to the right here, there's 3 sections that are highlighted in yellow. Those really are the key takeaways that I'll want us to know. Well, the first one, the big one, California is in. California is in as a free state. And the northern states get that, and that is a huge get for them and a massive give for the southern states. What about the other parts of the territory we got from Mexico, right? The places that would be New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, like what about all that? Well, Stephen A. Douglas here introduces a new idea, a kind of a fancy way of being a politician and like dodging the issue somewhat, and he calls it popular sovereignty. And in this particular context, here's what popular sovereignty means. What it means is this: hey, in Congress, we're not going to decide if it's slave or free. Who cares what my view is, says Stephen A. Douglas. I'm not really here to say if slavery is right or if it's good or if it's bad or right or wrong. What we're going to just do is just put it up for a vote, right? In these new territories, we're just going to put it up for a vote and let the people who live there decide if they want it to be slave or free. Now, who wins there, north or south? Well, I'd say no one really. This is just a way of like kicking the can down the road or punting it off to a different situation. What we will see, though, gang, in Unit 4 is that this is no solution. All right, this doesn't really resolve the questions about slavery. It just sort of hands it back to the people, and what we're going to find out is the people are going to lose their minds about that. So, more to come. What's the South going to get? Well, the big thing the South is going to get is It's an ugly law called a Fugitive Slave Act. The federal government gives them a very tough Fugitive Slave Act, which we'll look at in a moment. And so here's our state. Here's the new reality, right? California is in as a state. Oregon will be soon. Minnesota will be soon. Utah and New Mexico, well, I don't know, right? Let the people decide. The whole unorganized territory will be dealt with soon enough. The Fugitive Slave Act allows for a couple things. It says, all right, the federal government will help Southerners reclaim their property, their slaves, when their property escapes into the North. It used to be that basically if a slave escapes into the North, then they're out of slavery, right? Like Northern laws will protect them. But now the Fugitive Slave Act created this position created something called a slave hunter. Just an awful title. And a slave hunter is basically someone where it's like, you are not bound by Northern state laws. Your job is to go into the North and find slaves, find escaped slaves. And no Northern judge or sheriff or police officer will have any authority over you, nor will they decide if the person you found is a slave or not. All right? So these slave hunters go into the North, you find an escaped slave, you find a black person. You bring it before a federal magistrate, right? So someone from the federal government. And then they will decide if that is an escaped slave or not. And federal magistrates, get this, federal magistrates, you have to forgive me, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I know it's a 2-to-1 ratio, where a magistrate would be paid $20 for a case in which it was resolved that the person in question, the Negro in question, was an escaped slave, and they would be paid $10 for cases in which it was determined that black person was not a slave. So like the financial incentive that's built in is like they can round up people, they bring them before a federal magistrate, that federal judge decides if it's a slave or free person, and then there's no recourse for that black person in the North, then the slave hunter brings them back down in the South. This is not a lot of due process. This is gross, and Northerners are saying like we can't enforce the laws that we believe in our own states now. The law also required Northerners, like if you know of the location of any escaped slave, by law you must tell the authorities. And if it can be proven that you knew where an escaped slave was and you did not tell the police or you did not tell the slave hunters, then you yourself can go to jail. And so for a lot of people in the North who maybe hadn't given slavery much thought but didn't like it, suddenly this is like happening in their own neighborhoods, in their own cities, in their own backyards in a very upfront way. And this Fugitive Slave Act, the grossness of it, ends up kind of agitating anti-slavery feelings in the North. And for Southerners, they're just saying, hey, you guys got California, right? We needed more tough laws that could allow us to go get our property. And but it's safe to say, gang, that the compromise of 1850, I mean, it got through. It got through. Unlike what John C. Calhoun said, it didn't lead to an immediate dissolving of the Union. But we know enough history, gang, to know that, like, you can smell the fire coming in the distance here already. Things are ugly. So that will be our kind of cliffhanger resolution to Unit 3. And we'll pick it up next week with Unit 4. And of course, now you guys have to study for the Unit 3 exam. So with that, I'll hand it over to our sub. Take it away. Good luck, guys.